This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here at the Vintage Conservatory in Toronto with none other than Harry McWatters. How are you today, sir?
I'm great, thanks.
Now, you have quite a history in the wine world in BC. Please tell us a little bit about your past.
Well, I started making wine when I was 16.
16?
But I grew up in a family that grew wine, or didn't grow wine, but we drank wine frequently. And so I started making wine. Wasn't very good wine at 16, but it got better. And in 1968, I was asked to join Casabella Wines. It was a fledgling winery in Penticton to head up their sales department. And so I combined my career and my hobby together, and the rest is kind of history. That in 1980, we did our first vintage at Sumac Ridge.
Yes.
And we ended up selling to Vincor in 2000. And I stayed there for more than 8 years, but I also kept our vineyard, and in 2007 started making small batches of Meritage, and we've continued to grow, and we're under construction with a fairly significant project right now, 25,000 square foot winery that is focusing on what we grow best on our Black Sage bench.
And what do you feel grows best on the Black Sage bench?
Well, big reds. For starters, but certainly our whites, our Chardonnay have a distinctive personality, and we also do a white Meritage, but we're finding great success with Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot. We're also having early success with Syrah, and more recently with Carmenere.
Carmenere in BC.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
there's only 3 of us growing it in small quantities. We produced our first vintage in 2014, and it's progressing nicely in barrels, and we'll use it as part of our Meritage program. That I brought the term Meritage to Canada more than 20 years ago, and so that's near and dear to my heart, and we will always have a focus on bringing together Bordeaux varieties so that the end result can be greater than the sum of the parts.
How on earth did you convince those Americans that Meritage could be grown in Canada?
Well, that we took some wines and showed them. The fellow that was actually the executive director of the Meritage Association back in 1988 was a good friend of mine through the Society of Wine Educators, and we'd had some meaningful discussions, and he went back to his board to see if they would allow a non-American winery in, and their answer was no. So I appealed to him to go back and say, on the basis that he said American wine, I said, do you have a map of North America? And he said, yeah, I do. I said, you see that big pink part at the top where it says Canada? You'll also find the word North. And he said, I see it. And I said, well, go back and tell them that we're actually part of the Americas, number one. But number two, at the time I was the chairman of VQA Canada, and that we were just developing wine standards and modifications. So one of the things that we could do that they couldn't is they were reliant on the word Meritage as a trademark only. And they had not trademarked it in Canada, so that we could do that. And VQA Canada owns the trademark in Canada and adheres to the same rules. So by us being able to write that into our wine standards, actually gave greater credibility to the term Meritage in both Canada and in the United States. And subsequently now we see Australian and New Zealand producers, some wonderful Meritage being produced on the Baja in Mexico. There's an Israeli producer, there's somebody in the south of France, and I can't wait to see the first Bordelais producer that actually calls it Meritage. They'll probably run them out of the country, but it'll be fun.
Now, you have 2 quite distinctive labels here. Would you mind speaking to us a little bit about both of those? Because they're very different wines. They
are very different wines. That we only make 2 wines called McWatters Collection. And when I started off in this new venture, I had an entirely different name picked out, and that I had discussed it with my kids. It was really about a legacy brand that both my son and my daughter have grown up in the wine business with me. And they called it an intervention that they did, and came and said, so exactly why are you doing this, Dad? And I said, well, I believe that, down the road, if you wanted to do something, then, at least we've got a bit of a head start on it. And they said, well, that's great. If that's the case, and it's to be our legacy, then we have to tell you, we hate the name you picked. And I don't even share what that name was now. And they said, why don't you call it McWatters? And they knew what my answer would be. And I said, I'm actually really hesitant to do that. I think that people that, and anybody that's got their own name on a wine bottle, forgive me for this statement, but it's to me it's kind of about stroking the ego.
I understand.
And I didn't want to do that. B, their comment was, but if it's a legacy brand, we want to remind you it's actually our name too. And we grew up in the business, and we want to stay in the business, and we actually think your name will be worth more when you're gone. I said, well, hopefully you're not rushing me off, and they've assured me that's not the case. So we produce both a Meritage and a Chardonnay, and they're distinctively different than those same wines that we produce under the Time label. Anyway, we will only produce, our intent is only to produce a maximum of 2,000 cases of McWatters collection, and if they want to increase that in the future, that's their prerogative, they can grow it. And we produce it under a licensing agreement so that even though I'm the CEO of the company that owns Time, where we make the wine, but the agreement is that my children will continue to determine whether they want the wine made there or they want to take the brand elsewhere. The name will never be sold. And I've watched so many of my colleagues in the business over the years that remain in the business, but they pass wineries that bear their name and they have no involvement with it. And I just didn't ever want that to happen to myself or to my children. So the winery that we're making the wine at, it's called Time Estate Winery. And the meaning for that is that it's about time. I believe that wine is really about time and place. We've owned the vineyard since 1992. We've evolved the vineyard, and we think we've got a pretty good handle on what does best and what things we need to continue to raise the bar and improve the wines that come off of our vineyard. Everything we produce so far is estate bottled, and that'll certainly be the case over the next few years. So that's the brand that we're going to continue to grow and nurture and expand both the number of wines and the volume that we produce there. Whereas McWatters collection will be focused on selling it to people that share the same kind of philosophy I do and the style of wines that I like for Meritage and for Chardonnay. And the focus is selling it to direct to consumer across the country where provinces will allow that.
That was quite the expansive answer there. That was good. Yeah. Now, you're in the process of building a new winery.
We are. We've always kept this site, reserved the site as on a 3-acre piece in the middle of our 60-acre Sundial vineyard. And it's really an interesting project. It's 25,000 square feet that we'll be doing custom production. That's just not making wine for other wineries. We'll make our own brands there, obviously, but we continue to sell grapes to other wineries, and we will not only produce wine for other people, but we'll be able to help them fine-tune their wines with some of the equipment that we put into the winery. It really is about being able to enhance through some technology without manipulating the wine. For example, we have a reverse osmosis system. So if we get really ripe flavors to get all of the flavor captured in a wine, but the alcohol we think is too high, we can adjust that down by doing some alcohol removal with this piece of equipment. And we could also take out some unpleasant flavors, if we get a high volatile acidity or, God forbid, smoke taint. We have certainly threats of fires. Well, not threats, we had fires this year, but we seem to have escaped any smoke taint, but that's hopefully the case in years to come. But if it's not, we have the ability to remove that smoke taint from a wine that's been affected.
Superb. Well, thank you very much for showing us your wines today. They really have been quite delicious, and I'll look forward to hopefully seeing them in the market in Ontario. Harry, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Bye for now.